Okay. Hi, everyone. It's Tony Paladin, Head of Global Partnerships at Paladin Brooks. And today I've got the absolute privilege of having Daniel Ross, who's the co-founder of the Sports Business Syndicate. I met Dan over a year ago on LinkedIn, and he was telling me about SBS, which was back then a WhatsApp group of, I'd say, relatively well sort of chosen and respected members within the sports community, both in sports business and athletics. And I found it an extremely helpful place for myself to network and just find like-minded people. So I personally found that, on LinkedIn and on, say, Instagram, there's a lot of noise, and getting hold of people was difficult. And for me, it was just a natural fit. So I joined SBS fairly early on and met some absolutely wonderful people that I've kept in contact with and have actually advanced each other's networks greatly. So I'm very privileged to have Daniel with us and just for him to explain a little bit about the journey. So handing over to Daniel. So Dan, feel free to introduce yourself and a bit about your background.
Thank you very much, Tony. It's lovely to be here. Yeah, and thanks for sort of teeing up what we're all about at Sports Business Syndicate. I'll give a flavour of the origin story of it just to set context. I mean, my background actually is not deep in sport. I've been involved in the industry for the last couple of years, and SBS is the fruits of that. My background is in entrepreneurship, having worked in and around startups for the last 15 years as founder, investor, operator across many sectors. I would classify myself in some ways as a venture builder. In fact, before kicking off SBS, I worked with a venture studio building startups across multiple sectors for NEOM, based in London, but the NEOM in Saudi Arabia. So actually, my experience in startups is more in sort of financial services and insurance and healthcare than in sports. But I decided I wanted to get into sports, and one of the things I did as a means to navigate my way around the industry and meet people and understand what the issues were, I started a WhatsApp group, as you touched on. And to cut to the chase, that grew pretty quickly. And before we knew it, sort of fast forward a few months, we had a multi-group community on WhatsApp, which was kind of hitting 2,000 members. And that was a numerical capacity for WhatsApp, something I never thought I'd encounter using WhatsApp. And it provoked us to take the whole operation a little more seriously. I mean, just to give context, you touched on this. I mean, what is SBS? Sports Business Syndicate is a global network, a global community for leading voices in sport. And it's a sort of response, at least originally, to the high opportunity cost of networking, of career progression, of connectivity, which not only in sport, but it's something particular to the industry, I think, is born predominantly from the sort of long treadmill of events and sort of LinkedIn and content, which we're all awash with. So it's a means to avoid, to sort of repeat a cliche, to find signal in the noise and move away from something of the rather endless random walk that networking can be, by which I mean finding the right people at the right time in the right space, or finding the right opportunities, finding and accessing the right content, being in the room, virtual or otherwise, with the right people to have the right level of discussions. And I think focusing, at least initially, on some senior leaders in the industry really enabled quite quickly that sort of sense of high trust, high reciprocity, real peer-to-peer conversation. So we moved off WhatsApp, we moved on to Telegram. Telegram simply is the surface layer of the experience of SBS, where our digital native chat takes place. There's actually far more to it than that. And around the Telegram chat, underneath it, if you like, we built this really powerful and cool kind of AI-driven community engine, which is really enabling the sort of level of connectivity that I'm talking about. Because I think, one of the other sort of issue that we found in the industry is that it's not so much that sport has, I would say, sort of an infrastructure problem. And there's loads of community, there's loads of networks, there's loads of events and so on. But there's a sort of what I would call continuity problem. Loads of smart people about, lots of valuable conversations going on, lots of high quality moments, but they don't compound. Engagement, in other words, is quite episodic. It doesn't sort of carry any momentum. You go to an event, there's a buzz, you're part of a WhatsApp group, and then it goes quiet, and so on. So what we built underneath Telegram, if you like, was this high trust operating layer behind the scenes, which is kind of enabling the relationships, insight, opportunity to accumulate over time.
Yeah, I think the 2 points you touched on is what I noticed from my own experience was primarily high trust and collaboration. So just being involved initially in the WhatsApp group. I mean, I witnessed the growth. So I was on the WhatsApp group, and um, just every person that came on, I found just had something valuable to say. So there was, for all intents and purposes, very little noise. And for myself personally, at that point, um, it was really nice just having a global community where, and I think Dan and I had spoken about this. I mean, him and I chat quite often on WhatsApp. Is that it's also the room is relatively full of respected people. So what I find great is that generally when someone said something on their group, like it came from a place of experience or authority. So it filters out so much of the noise. And I think for someone who takes sports business seriously and networking seriously, that's really valid because you can actually, it's a high trust community. And I think over and above that, which has been quite attractive, at least from what I've seen, is touching on your point about there are a million factions sitting everywhere that are episodic, but often you'll find there are specific cohorts within a certain sport, or it's a specific, it'll either be marketing or media or sponsorship or elite athletes or whatever it is. And what's been quite nice with the Sports Business Syndicate and the way it's structured and the way that Telegram is emulating WhatsApp is the structure behind it. So although you've got the global community sitting there that's of high trust, you've also got subsections inside there. So you can join the little cohorts of interest. So let's say, for example, I'm looking to network with professionals in, let's say, golf and business leaders in golf. There would be a group for that. Let's say I was specifically looking for a group of Olympians and elite athletes. There's a group there for that. It's all sitting within the same infrastructure, but it's quite nice to be part of the different subgroups. But then what also filters out the noise quite nicely is that there might be groups that are specifically are not relevant to maybe myself, my network, and I might not have much to give. So I can opt into not necessarily being part of that. So yeah, I think, I mean, it sort of leads me on to the natural question is basically why syndication, collaboration, and a collective shared intelligence, why is it becoming more important than the isolated operators that you spoke about?
I think I could sort of answer that probably from an SBS point of view. Then I think there's a sort of an industry-wide conversation around sort of collaboration and shared intelligence. I think from a community point of view, I think as I look at the whole industry, the industry is sort of quite fragmented. So there's lots of noise, there's lots of content out there, but it's something particular about the sports industry. It's particularly geographically fragmented by the nature of where sports teams are, and it kind of pushes people to the fringes a bit. Of course, there are hubs, London, LA, and New York, but there are also lots of people all over the place. And I think, therefore, the sense of being able to push people together into a safe space. You talked about trust. Of course, trust is absolutely kind of key tenet. Without that, without the confidence to sort of show vulnerability and to be able to lean on one's fellow members, the whole idea of, call it syndication or collaboration or coming together and sharing in the broad sense falls apart. I mean, shared intelligence, of course, is one of the beauties of what this platform can create. And I think it's this idea of compounding accumulated knowledge and connection and relationship history, which is the engine that we built enables that. It doesn't do that. LinkedIn, for example, other sort of older conventional social platforms don't do that. They're a bit more sort of linear and episodic in their nature. People post things, but there is no memory layer behind those posts. So they're there for a moment and then they disappear. The concept of sort of shared intelligence in SBS is really interesting because it means that you, for example, could be, as you say, you're very interested in golf, and you can go in and identify historic golf conversations or threads of ideas that you can quickly synthesize from the archive. Of course, that was one of the challenges with WhatsApp, that stuff gets lost. I mean, that is the idea, and therefore being in an environment where all that knowledge is held and can be reaccessed, in a sense, is the power of network effects, both in terms of people. The more people that are there, the more valuable it becomes, the more intelligence, the more knowledge is there and able to be shared, the more valuable the whole experience becomes. Does that make sense from a sort of community point of view for starters?
Totally. I think it really, the way you've captured it, and I think this is exactly the challenge one has with something like WhatsApp. I mean, WhatsApp is basically it is a conveyor belt. So you'll put your piece of you'll put your 2 cents on there, and then it just gets layered on top with more and more comments, and then stuff does get lost, and it is difficult to find. I think being able to both have the networking element where the platform is conversational, so as a WhatsApp group would behave, but the fact that you can actually use the collective intelligence so that you can take the gems or the diamonds in the rough. They're still there. It creates a general repository. And then I think using the capacity also of AI is that you effectively generating your own archive of people's input. And I think from there you can almost just looking on collective shared experience and intelligence over time, you can almost use that as a predictive model as to where sport's going and the types of trends. I know from our side, at least, we've seen incredible changes from 2024 to 2025 and going into 2026, just in terms of how sponsorships works versus how true collaboration and a partnership should behave. So just the way sponsorship in general has evolved immensely due to a deeper level of integration and activation. So we've seen that, and funnily enough, or maybe not so funnily enough, a lot of this was spoken about preemptively that I'd noticed on SBS. So it was of no surprise that these changes had been made. And the same thing on the media side. I mean, as we move more and more into the streaming space and OTT and influencer marketing and UGC, which is user-generated content, and that integration at a brand level. I mean, this stuff wasn't around 2 years ago, or it was, but it was very, very limited. The thinking was more in sort of broadcast value in media, as opposed to like the feeling in media of having boots on the ground, like actually participating in the sport. So I think these trends or the trend mapping can be made a lot easier. So it's not just the thumb suck, but it's actually using people's lived experience and a combination of those predictions moving forward for people to make smarter decisions, which actually leads me on to the question is, how do you see the commercial landscape of sport in general? And I'm talking in sports business and in sports performance, and potentially in partnerships evolving over the next, say, 2 to 3 years.
I think I've got the question, although the connection is a bit up and down. I think I've got the question. I mean, let me make a connecting point. We're still talking about what's going on in the industry and this sort of idea of shared intelligence and collaboration. You touched on it in terms of sort of streaming, but isolation, if you like, used to work okay in sport because the sort of distribution was cheap, as in, sort of Sky, ESPN, Canal Plus, or whoever owned the pipes through the satellite and the cable and the set-top boxes. And because, media, there was some sort of media scarcity, attention was more captive, there were few channels, there were just fewer ways to consume. And as you touch on, streaming has sort of unbundled everything, because now, instead of those sort of simple fan bundles where you sort of subscribe to Sky and have all the channels, in a sense, the cost of sport was subsidized across a lot of non-sports fans. Now the cost is not spread across millions of households, and so the churn is more immediate, and therefore the true willingness to pay for things is more exposed. And all these sort of sports rights, which obviously relied on this sort of cross-subsidization, now look extraordinarily overpriced. I mean, this is a sort of the theme of the last couple of years, which connects to what we were talking about sort of somehow shared intelligence syndication and what's sort of concretely going on in the industry. I think sort of the world has sort of also changed structurally, not only in sport. Everyone is publishing something, everyone's selling something, everyone is sort of competing for the same sort of finite attention. So I think, therefore, this sort of concept of syndication collaboration works really well, especially sort of below the surface, certainly in an SBS point of view, because, if you can kind of have shared audience, you have lower acquisition costs for customers, shared intelligence can improve decision-making speed, quality, and so forth. But I think the smartest operators now, kind of crucially, are collaborating. They're collaborating on data, they're collaborating on community, they're collaborating on distribution and infrastructure.
Okay, cool. Sorry,
This is a good example of it, by the way, just maybe to illustrate it slightly, just to sort of give an example. I mean, there are other football groups as well in multi-club ownership. I think they are good representations of what can work well when you can kind of synthesize, player recruitment, performance data, fan data, identity, commercial partner insight. You can bring that all together. That can be pretty powerful.
Yeah, I think it's huge. I mean, just the way it's almost a form of cross-pollination. So, the commercial sports landscape in general, I think the more people know about how big sport is and what the challenges of sport are, both within performance and business, because there's a clear intersect between the two. Obviously, for athletic development to occur and for sport to be watched and watchable, it needs to start at a grassroots level, which needs funding. So one never kind of gets to an elite level without the sports business underlay. I mean, that kind of has to be there. And I think, having platforms like SBS, it allows both sides to also see the challenges that lie within what it takes to get grassroots moving, to get amateur clubs moving, or amateurs moving into professional, moving into elite. So from a perspective of true collaboration in sport, and especially on the sports business side, I mean, everyone wants to get into sport because A, it's fun. It's fun to participate in and watch, and B, there's really good financial upside to be capitalized on. So I think there's a good a good intersect between the like I said, the performance side and the actual business side. But the more people see and the more people know, the more you can kind of see a convergence. And this is where I do see platforms that create an area of a lot of high trust between a whole multitude of people within sport. I'm not even going to say sports business. I'll say sport as an ecosystem is really, really powerful, because it just equips people with the knowledge and what they need to be doing in order to grow sport, which will naturally drive performance and competition, which is ultimately what a lot of, watching Premier League or Olympic-based sport is all about. So,
yeah.
Which kind of leads me on to, probing as to, in your observation specifically, I'm not going to say necessarily an opinion, but an observation, because you've got a very high level, you've got total oversight on SBS and all the conversations that happen in there, is where, I'll use a term, smart operators. I mean, people that are advancing in the world of sport and in sport business. Where do you feel that they are focusing and should be focusing basically their time, capital, and partnerships development?
I mean, maybe a couple of thoughts. I mean, high-level thoughts around how sponsorship. I think sponsorship is being redefined, which also sort of again connects sort of back to community. I think sophisticated brands who are thinking about connecting with sports assets are no longer just looking for badge placement or sort of simple impressions or these sort of awareness-only deals. It needs to be far more data-driven, insight-driven, but importantly, sort of co-created platform. So I think sponsorship is becoming more of a strategic collaboration. I think sort of thematically that's something sort of I'm observing. It's a sort of a big theme. In terms of smart operators, think of what's going on in the private equity world, where and how money is moving, certainly sort of thematically more from sort of opportunistically to something more operational approach. So, for example, if you look at now CVC Capital Partners, who have now created their own group inside the Global Sports Group, investing across rugby, football, Formula One, and now this latest investment in potential investment, I think $300 million into the equine network. It's more about trying to sort of shared services, thinking about data discipline, rather than just sort of chucking money at sort of sports rights. So I think some of the more kind of clever P operators are sort of thinking in that way, like I mean, Silver Lake, who invested in City Football Group, 5 or 6 or 7 years ago, they're not betting on buying a football club so much as the sort of the system and the scalability that group has. It's buying into sort of a global platform. I think that's interesting. You look at the Bruin Capital now, just raised their $1 billion fund. It's focused on, I think, more rights adjacent infrastructure, media distribution, data. It's not, again, it's sort of moving away from kind of just buying clubs and buying leagues. It's a bit more of a sort of picks and shovels approach. So I think there's a real sort of shift, if you like, in how clever investors are sort of thinking long term about how to allocate capital in a more sort of professional, risk adjusted way.
I think it's a very logical point, and you've actually seen this in real time. So in terms of what smart operators are doing, it's systems investment. So you use the word systems, and I think that exactly hits the nail on the head. If you look at, for example, Saudi Arabia, what the Kingdom of Saudi has done very methodically over the last couple of years, they have specifically looked at, how can we really invest smartly in sport? And if you actually look at it in a nutshell, what Saudi has done and is doing, I mean, a lot of it through the Public Investment Fund, is basically creating a circular economy. They have created, in my observation, their own circular economy in sport. So the investment, basically, where they're getting involved is obviously at elite level sports, which you see visibly because it's televised and streamed accordingly. But I think a lot of what people don't necessarily see is you can see all the infrastructure build, and then within the infrastructure build, you can look at the funding at developing young athletes. It's also, a lot of it is in education, in sports marketing. So if you look at Saudi, and especially the PIF, I mean, the investment in that entire system to make it happen, and the proof is in the pudding. I mean, you're effectively, what they've done is that they've almost created, like I said, a circular economy or a loop where it becomes self-sustaining over time. So it's no longer, it kind of moves away from a case of maybe a sponsor coming along, or a big brand, or an investor, and saying, okay, cool, I'm going to buy that football club, or I'm going to buy that sports property. In order to make that work, I need to buy these players, and they bring it in. And that's all great. And that organization or that sports property is going to perform for a period of time, because they've got, obviously, they've kind of basically outsourced elite performance. They've brought in the best to perform, but that's got a lifespan because of the fact that you're buying what's already been built. And then from there, you also, from an athletics perspective, is you've brought in people who've already gone through other ecosystems, who, when they've finished their tenure during that engagement with that club, team, or organization, they move on, into other areas. Whereas in contrast, when you've built an ecosystem from the bottom up, it's going to probably recirculate itself. It's not you bringing in an outsider to perform purely for performance metrics, but having brought someone in through the system, they're more likely to give back and contribute in their own way. So the natural progression, at least what I've seen with a lot of sportsmen that have been involved, and sportswomen that have been involved from a younger age and are deeply ingrained in the sport, a lot of them stay within sport. So you'll watch them develop from young kids into young adults, into elite sportsmen, and then from there continue into sports business because it's a passion. And I think that the more secure the grounding at the ground level is, when someone can actually really acknowledge that creating a career in sport doesn't only need to be being a professional athlete. One can be a professional athlete and then easily move on into another area of sports business. I also think through investing earlier on in grassroots development, you actually have, I want to say, almost job creation, because there's certain role players that need to be present when sports are building up. And I'm talking not only in coaches and trainers, but it's in sports psychologists, it's in media. I mean, media has got huge value at that particular point in terms of storytelling of a young athlete's journey. So I think it's a very valid point that you've raised, and that investment into a system actually, although it might not be that sexy up front, because you're not, because sports sponsorships and partnerships is an interesting one, because a brand with money will often come along and they want the highest amounts of visibility and hence return on investment. So they want to go kind of where the action is. But where the unsexy part is, they're developing at a deeper level in the sport that's not necessarily always seen. But in order with a 4 to 8 year kind of goal in mind. And I think at least from a partnerships perspective, as we see, the most successful ones are the ones that know that they're in for the long haul. So they choose an ecosystem in which to invest. And we look at an 8 year cycle. So that it's normally 2 year. It's either, a single tenure where a brand or an investor almost knows that there's not going to be, or there may well not be, it being highly visible in terms of performance or storytelling for that matter, but they know by investing in the right ecosystem, it'll drive and it'll build and it'll uplift. Which then leads me on to another question is, at the moment, and I think you probably already answered it, is anybody at the moment who's sort of sitting in sports business is like, what not to do? What should someone in sports business right now not be doing based on your knowledge and your observation? And across all the chats in Sports Business Syndicates, on the Sports Business, on the SBS platform itself.
Yeah, I mean, it makes a connection to what you were saying. I think platform system-led thinking is less volatile. It's less sensitive to sort of short-term market movements and sort of sentiment change. It's sort of long-term thinking. And with that in mind, where would I not be going? I wouldn't be, if I'm thinking about, fan engagement, oft repeated term, I wouldn't be just jumping out, building standalone fan apps with no operational integration or with no sort of proper connectivity and feedback loop. I would be staying away from kind of tokenization or tokenized engagement. I would be, if I'm in an events organizer, of which there are many in the industry, I would be staying away from sort of more one-off events which don't have any real system underneath. I would be staying away from strategies or sponsorships which sort of influencer sponsorships which don't have any sort of proper data capture embedded in them. If I'm in the sort of rights game, I'm staying away from, and this is perhaps a bit obvious, mid-tier leagues like Ligue 1 in France, Serie A. Well, Serie A is not a mid-tier league, but Serie A, all in Premier League as well, sort of plateauing, flat domestic rights. You have to look at what happened with DAZN in France. Suddenly their arrival exposed enormous sort of weak willingness to pay. They sort of came in, I think, following Media Pro hasn't worked at all. So I think, maybe the summary of all that, which sort of tries to sort of synthesize various strands of our conversation, is that if you're looking across, say, the right space, capital allocation, sponsorship, tech, I think, and I sort of try this, without sounding glib, tying this back to sort of how I'm thinking at Sports Business Syndicate. Sport is moving away from sort of moments to systems, and it's sort of moving away from being immediately sort of short-term and transactional to compounding relationships.
Okay. So, moving forward with SBS, as you've described, this kind of started with your journey, moving from more in the financial sector, and out of sheer curiosity, I guess, in sport, is creating a single area or a single community where people could chat. And obviously, you reached out to a few people in sport, and through doing that, you find a bit of trust, and those networks basically compounded. So you created a whole bunch. So SBS, almost accidentally, I'd say, through your own trying to learn more about the sports business and accessing the right people, organically grew to create a more sort of, or a bigger network of high trust operators in sport. And the proof is obviously in the pudding. I personally watched the WhatsApp group grow. It was at a rate of knots. What I also quite appreciated, I can say this sort of quite openly and candidly, is how well moderated SBS is. So if there was somebody sort of speaking out of turn or didn't really kind of deserve to keep their place there, they were warned to say, look, you're actually not, maybe not contributing meaningfully. So it sort of begs the question, I mean, moving forward with regards to SBS, and now that it's sitting on Telegram and growing quite steadily, is, I mean, who would benefit from you from becoming involved in SBS at the moment, and the community? I mean, who are you looking for, and why, and how can they add value, and B, what can they take away? I mean, what is your vision for SBS over the next, say, 12 months?
What I'm less interested in is hierarchy for its own sake. There are lots of media properties, not only in sport, it's commonplace across business, who fetishize seniority for its own sake. You know, the sort of the notion of the C-suite is sort of exciting for its own sake. What I'm interested in, and there is of course overlap here, is sort of thoughtful voices and opinion and conversation in the industry, and that can come ultimately from emerging leaders and sports tech founders, as it can from those who are running big organizations. So it's the collision, it's the collision of ideas, it's the diversity of thought and background and people, which makes it special. I think that's the direction of travel in my mind. You know, we very much started out as something for sort of senior people, and I think that sort of holds. There's an importance in having and retaining a certain sort of peer-to-peer. That's what people like, but it doesn't have to be peer-to-peer necessarily as defined by where you sit in an organization. It's what you have to say. There are a lot of extraordinarily dull people who sit at the top of organizations, and it goes both ways. So in terms of member profile, that's what I'm interested in. And in terms of value, I mean, it's a couple of things. You know, what are the need states which drive people to community? I mean, at its sort of base, you know, increasingly in a world of AI overwhelm and sort of polarized political, economic landscape, people are looking for belonging. And community feels of the zeitgeist, and people look for kind of deep social ties. In a world where computers are taking over, you know, we seek ever more human connection, and community in any form can have a really important role to play. At a more sort of rudimentary practical level for people in SBS, look, it's about progression, however you define that, and people are on the cycle at different points, whether they're looking for their next job, gig, client, just building their network, looking to acquire knowledge, looking to find peers with whom they can share experience and learn from. We are a safe space to do all those sorts of things. The AI, which I touched on, is just an engine to make a lot of the stuff more efficient. It means that when people need things or ask for things, they can do that privately and let the computer answer those questions. And therefore, what that means for the chat, particularly on the online element of it, is that it is distilled quickly into polemic, into discussion, into thought provocation, into idea sharing. And that's real value for a lot of people. What I would say, and I might say this because of course I'm biased, that to be part of a community and to be an effective member of a community, both in terms of what you give as well as what you get, requires at least a mid-term, if not long-term view. People who say, this isn't for me because I haven't met anyone yet after a week, in my view, looks at it in the wrong way. You need to come in and think for the long term, in a sense that, you know, you don't go to a cocktail party or a drinks with mates and leave after a couple of gulps of beer because you haven't done a deal yet. It comes. Yeah. There is a certain karma by giving stuff, by paying it forward, you get it back because you meet good people and good people refer, and you're part of something bigger. It's important not to be, I think if you go into it too transactionally, you fail.
I couldn't agree more. I think some of the most authentic, and this is proof in the pudding. I mean, and this is why I've actually, one of the big reasons I really wanted to actually have a chat with you face to face and allow you to really explain a bit about it is that, I mean, I, from day one, have absolutely thoroughly enjoyed being part of the SBS community. And I'll be completely honest, is so the irony actually behind this is that my business partner, Hannah, and I met on SBS. So Paladin Brooks is for obviously Tony Paladin and Hannah Brooks. Hannah and I met on SBS. So we were actually talking about this the other day. It's like, so how did we actually end up, was it LinkedIn or was it a referral? You're like, no, hang on a sec. And I actually went back and looked, dug up the correspondence on the WhatsApp group at that particular point in time. So, I mean, that for me is proof in the pudding. And then the sort of the compound effect from that, if I look at a lot of people that we are currently to date still working with and expanding networks with, I'd say at least more than half of the truly authentic relationships that I've developed with people I've met on SBS. So I can almost sort of be externally and explicitly grateful that, I mean, if it weren't for SBS, I'm not sure how quickly we could have scaled by, banging our heads against the wall through trial and error. And I actually remember quite clearly, Dan, I was sending you a voice note. I was out on a run, and I can't remember. I think I'd hit a wall of frustration at some point because I'd been networking quite a bit on LinkedIn, but I'd been led down so many rabbit holes, because you'll meet someone on LinkedIn and then you end up talking for weeks and months, and you get someone just upsells themselves so much, and they create the illusion that they're high trust, but they basically spoken a load of nonsense to you. And then when push comes to shove, and you actually, you want to take the relationship a little further in terms of business and prospecting, they don't come up with the goods, or they disappear, and then you actually realize it was all smoke and mirrors in the first place. So if you look at the amount of hours burnt, and I actually remember this clearly, having a bit of a sort of vent that had happened, because that had literally that morning, someone who was kind of supposed to deliver just didn't deliver, and this was a random sort of, I was about to say LinkedIn. It was a LinkedIn hookup, but it was literally exactly that. And if I look back historically over the last, I mean, since I've been involved now, I've been pushing 18 months, I'd imagine maybe close on 2 years. I can't remember exactly when I joined the WhatsApp group, but again, I can't actually think of one person I've met on SBS that I'm not still in touch with in some way or form today, that there at least has not been some form of referral connection growth. So, I mean, for me, and this is not me being paid to do an advertorial for SBS. I mean, this is me talking with true authenticity, which is why we, Paladin Brooks want to do partner specifically with SBS and to try and grow the platform together through our networks that are now sort of compounding and taking it back to the root. So, I mean, I would encourage anybody listening to this to reach out. And the nice thing about Dan, he's a very approachable guy. So if you've got any questions, just drop him a note on LinkedIn, or if he gives out, he'll always respond, which is also what's nice with dealing with the guys at SBS, is it's highly responsive, and there is a lot of mutual respect. So I'm looking really forward to seeing sort of how SBS grows from here on. And I think, I mean, maybe lastly before we wrap up, is the amount of, when I say social engagement, it's not only a WhatsApp platform that a digitized forum where people speak online, is that the amount of meetups that actually one gets that sees is published on SBS. Someone will say like, "Hey, I'm in London," or I'm going to Los Angeles. Does anyone in the community want to get together? Or I'm hosting a breakfast or an event. So a lot of the connection that gets made online converts quite quickly into face-to-face collaboration, and that also like further deepens network building, which I think is highly valuable. So really congrats on creating something awesome. And any closing thoughts before we head off and share details?
Yeah, head off into the sunset. No, I mean, look, thank you for your extremely kind endorsement and feedback. I mean, we are the proud godparents of, I think, many partnerships, including yours, and nothing gives me greater pleasure, because that, at its heart, is what this is all about. I think, one of the things I meant to say earlier, and one of the challenges with LinkedIn, we all use it, so the purpose of this is not to denigrate it. It's horses for courses, but it's because of the algorithm. But of course, LinkedIn is driven by a small number of dominating voices. So there is a one-to-many quality about it in terms of how information and opinion is dispersed. What we have in community, not only ours, by the way, but what community can bring is collective, accumulated expertise and knowledge, and give a platform to amplify many people's voices. So that's good individually. I mean, if you want to just share what you have to say in a safe space, but also what happens then if you put all that opinion together. Sometimes I feel with SBS at its best, we are sweeping up the debris or the scraps of the cutting room floor of what's actually going on in the industry. What are really people thinking, and what are those who are behind the deals and the conversations? What does it all really mean? And sharing that amongst each other, you certainly don't get in more sort of public forums. I would say, of course, I would also say I would encourage people who are of the right kind of profile and background and interest to come and join SBS or check us out. As I think maybe we'll put the link in the show notes, but you can DM me on LinkedIn. You can email me at Daniel@sportsbusinesssyndicate.com if you want to know any more. I'm always happy to chat with people who are interested in what we're doing.
Awesome. Well, thanks for your time, Dan. I really appreciate it. And thanks for taking the time to really unpack a bit about it. And I hope anyone who's listening to this, please feel free to reach out, ask any questions that you want, and hopefully look forward to seeing you on the platform. And it's always nice to meet people in person, which is it's great. You chat online and then in face to face. So I've yet to still meet you face to face, but hopefully in the next month or two, when I'm over in the UK, we can go and have a coffee and actually meet in person.
It'll be a pleasure.
Have a good afternoon, Dan, and we'll chat soon.
Thank you, Tony. It's been a pleasure.
Well, take care. Cheers.